Hey, aloha, love tribe. Welcome to the show. I have somebody here with me who has been kind of like an angel on my shoulder since I started my Bitcoin journey. And this is Rob Warren. He's the author of the Bitcoin Miners Almanac. And Rob, you're somebody who's always been so generous and gracious with your time, answering questions for me, being very encouraging on my journey as a newbie and a Bitcoiner, and certainly as a woman in the space. You've been so amazing, and I'm just so grateful to call you my friend, and I'm so excited for you to talk about your book, and let's talk about Bitcoin mining together.
I
Welcome.
love it. Thank you so much, Val. I feel very much the same way. I remember one of the earliest conversations we had was at one of the meetups or one of the conferences or something, but it was a little while back, and it was right when the space has always been super, super tech bro heavy, super, super kind of financy, like engineering type.
Yeah.
And DJ Val shows up and is just flowing around the room saying hi to everybody. And I remember schmoozing with you at an event. I can't remember for the life of me what event it was. And I kind of look over and I go, what are you doing? Like, how did you decide to come here of all places? Of all the places you could be, this is where you decided to be. And you told me something so interesting that really set the stage for me in terms of where the space is going and who we should expect to kind of come and be learning about Bitcoin in the future, which was that you said to me that it was the human rights aspect
Yep.
of Bitcoin that got you interested to begin with.
Yep.
And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever because for me, at least, having been in the space since 2017, it's always really, really interesting to see who are the newcomers, who are the new folks that for whatever reason they're kind of called to come and figure out what the heck this Bitcoin thing was. And I thought that you were just such a perfect example of that, showing up and going, okay, what is DJ Val doing here? And then, of course, to see you DJ at the Bitcoin conference was only a greater pleasure because there she is in her element.
Aw, thanks, Rob. I know, it's fun. I mean, it is intimidating, I think, for a lot of people who I mean, obviously, as a DJ, I'm a nerd. I like buttons, I love technology, but I'm not a coder. I'm not a billionaire crypto or hedge fund manager person or whatever, and so going into those rooms, especially in a dev, Bitcoin, like a bit devs meetup or anything, or it's just like, uh, but everybody's so warm and welcoming and inviting. And you've definitely been, like I said, an angel on my shoulder. So thank you.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, and I love the work that you're up to. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about your history. How the heck did you get into Bitcoin mining?
Love it.
From I know you had a creative agency a while back in New Orleans, and thank you for taking some pictures for me a couple weeks ago. So I'm going to use those. But how did you go from this creative man into Bitcoin, tech and mining and writing this book? And why did you write this book?
I love that. Well, hopefully still creative, but just in a different way, right?
Yeah.
It's many mediums, but one individual. Yeah, as many folks in the space, your kind of professional career has jumped around a bunch, and so I'm not so strange in the Bitcoin space for being one of many weirdos who have very atypical or non-traditional backgrounds, not coming from like traditional energy or traditional engineering. I'm a philosophy trained in philosophy undergraduate and psychology, and then worked in education and was in startup in New Orleans for the better part of a decade, where I started essentially a high volume production agency that was generating content for organizations, typically kind of mid-sized, larger organizations that wanted to have the quality of product for like an in-house photo or video agency,
Hmm.
but didn't want to pay those kinds of rates. So we had an agency that was basically kind of the outsourced version of that to all these various companies. So it was a huge blast. We got it up to about 13 people. We were super active in the startup space in New Orleans, which is very small by startup space comparisons anywhere else. Um, and then, as all things go, you learn a lot in startup. It's kind of like your MBA that you hopefully are able to pay yourself doing. Um, we were going through a round of fundraising and had a very very different idea of direction with my partner at the time. And from there, it turned out to, as they say in the marriage space, it's irreconcilable differences. People just wanted very very different things.
Yeah.
So we wound up winding that company down, and thank goodness we did, because there's no way that it would have made it through all the COVID lockdowns and net downs and everything. Just because 90% of the work that we were doing, 75 probably 80-90% of the work that we were doing was very events heavy. And
Mm.
New Orleans is a very events heavy city.
Yeah.
And that went to zero. And it just sat there for, 18 months, 2 years. So that point wound that company down. At the time, I was meeting and dating my now wife, and wound up
Mhm.
in the state that she grew up in Colorado. And I'd kind of heard about this Bitcoin thing in 2016. There's a really excellent podcast with a guy named Russ Roberts called Econ Talk that comes out of the Library of Economics and Liberty. He was initially located in Stanford. Now he's in Israel as a professor there, I believe. But there's just this fantastic podcaster that's very economics focused. And in 2016, he had Wences Casares on the podcast. And Wences, if you're familiar with the work that he's done, was just so exuberant and so over the top and so excited about this Bitcoin thing that I had kind of seen about it, like any guy in their 20s does, who finds himself on a weird website with a Tor address, not buying anything, of course, but seeing how things are denominated and hearing this Wences Casares guy talk about it, but didn't really start buying until really 2017. So self-custodying at the time, thank goodness, I kind of got the self-custody pill very quickly. But there's really only two reasons that people buy Bitcoin or get into Bitcoin, at least in my perspective, in the kind of developed world, which is that you are either greedy or you have to get into Bitcoin. The function of Bitcoin is necessary for you. So
Yeah.
I was definitely on the greedy side. I was running a startup. Maybe I buy this asset. Maybe I make a bunch of money off of it. How cool will I be? Pat myself on the back. I'm a genius 20-something that's buying this magical internet money. Didn't really understand it as a network. On the other side of that coin, obviously, you have people who need Bitcoin to protect their purchasing power, to
Yeah.
protect their wealth. Those people kind of grok it in a very powerful but different way. I was in very much the first world, let me buy this thing, number go up, right?
Yeah.
And then was so busy in the company, kind of forgot about it. But as I relocated back up to Colorado, and with the advent of all the COVID lockdowns and all the human rights issues that came out of that domestically, not spread across the world, but a resegregation based on your vaccine card status that was happening in the wealthiest country in the world, and everybody was kind of oddly going along with it. The Bitcoin pill kind of popped again in the brain, and for the first time, I really understood it and appreciated it as the network Bitcoin, as this kind of living, breathing thing, and not just as this kind of number go up mechanism. And it was around then that I made the choice that this is the industry that I want to work in full time. So I was doing a bunch of work in, not in the dev side because I'm not a dev, but in early stage mining. So at that time they had Mining for the Streets, which was diverted no KYC, this great little
Mm.
PDF, very introductory, kind of intro to home mining. And then Econo Alchemist was doing a ton of guides, a ton of write ups. He was doing a ton of home heating stuff. This was, prior to the upstream data black box. And for the first time, you could sort of get an S9 for $150 shipped to your house. And happened to know a couple of guys, Neil Ronan Miner and Joe Rogers, formerly of Bitcoin Magazine, who bought a pallet of S9s, and just because they wanted to support plebs, broke it down and reshipped it out to a bunch of people. And I got a couple of S9s, and we were living in this fifth story apartment right off of Wash Park in Denver. And I plugged these things in, and my wife looked at me like I was absolutely bonkers. Because I was plugging in this industrial equipment, and even an S9 is a piece of industrial equipment. Like it's not a cute little cell phone. It's not like a thing that fits in your pocket. Like it is an aggressive, angry machine that should not be sitting in your living room, or in my case, my guest bathroom. Um, and she looked at me and was like,
Babe.
"I love you a lot, but if you want to get married, we will solve for this." And needless to say, I figured it out quick. At the time, Steve Barber had actually published a little diagram for how you could construct what is now known as the black box, but it was a brown box. You could construct it out of a piece of plywood,
Mm.
a single piece of plywood that you can cut and break down. So I drove over to the local Home Depot and bugged the heck out of them, buying a single piece of plywood that I made them put like 8 cuts into, um, to go take that home and then assemble this brown box on my 5th story balcony because we didn't have anywhere else to take it. Excuse me, and then had a couple of S9s that then lived, first in the bathroom for a little bit because we got some heating in the winter, and then out on our balcony. So this brown box sat on the balcony and ran with a couple of S9s in it as I was continuing to learn in the mining space. And through that time, I did some write ups. I was producing content for Bitcoin Magazine. Was just trying to get a feel for what the heck this mining thing was, because everybody had a very strong opinion of it, and everybody seemed to say, "Oh, it's so hard, you don't want to get into it. Like, stick with this other stuff," or "Oh, it's too complicated," or "Oh, it's not profitable. It's never profitable. You never want to do it." Um, and it's so often discussed, but so very rarely actually done or mastered, that it kind of planted a seed in me, right? Let me kind of take this little segue down the rabbit hole, down the Bitcoin mining rabbit hole, and that's where I've been since. I've since set up mines, worked for large publicly traded companies, written the Bitcoin Miners Almanac, which of course we I'm super excited to share with you and kind of chat about today. But that all kind of culminated in the writing of this book, the Bitcoin Miners Almanac, where really the effort that was done here was to not to necessarily simplify or oversimplify, but to add some synthesis to the space. Because we
Mhm.
hear of so many different ways that people are mining Bitcoin, and you've got the guys who are mining on solar co-locations, or the guys who are mining on nuclear sites, or the guys who are mining in the oil field, or the guys who are in the jungles of Africa mining on hydro that is otherwise stranded in these various locations. And the way this stuff comes out to the general person is it just looks like an alien landscape. And so the goal with the book was really, how do you generate some coherence here? How do you start to establish the principles of what this is, what Bitcoin mining is? And fundamentally, you can either do it ideologically, where you're just doing it because you want to support the network, like these beautiful little bit axes that they have now that people put on their desks and they mine with, or you do it as a business. And so that's the world that I was trying to create synthesis around with the book, which is, how do we understand this business? How does this business work? How do people think about this business? And how the heck is somebody who's mining on oil and gas in the same network as some guy who's got 700 megawatts on ERCOT that he turns off at the flip of the switch when the electricity price gets too high? How does that work? And so the goal was to really start to establish the principles that sit behind Bitcoin mining. And if you can do that, then you can make it very intuitive for people in understanding all these various implementations that we see.
And so, Rob, so what, like, as you're writing this book, what did you get any big aha synthesis moments where you're like, "Oh, got it. This is why they're doing this, and it goes together here," or anything that was sort of disjointed? Did you have any big, epiphanies that you want to share?
Oh my goodness, it's all epiphanies.
The whole thing's a giant epiphany
It's
ball.
like it's like I've heard people say, where it's like once you see it and once you kind of put the pieces together,
Mhm.
um, it's obvious but not necessarily intuitive.
Yeah.
So when you look at it, you go, "Oh, yeah, that makes sense." But you wouldn't necessarily have gotten there by just some grand stroke of intellectual brilliance.
Mhm.
There were the way in which I chose to set up the book was to start with the machine,
'Kay.
and the reason I felt that starting with the machine was the best way to start the book was because fundamentally that's what connects you to the Bitcoin network. It's the machine. The machine is doing work, and that work is contributing hashes or mining on a template that then it's rewarded for. So that is the way in which you generate revenue in this world. And
So
okay,
can you
that's
just take a step back just again, if
sure.
in case there's folks in the audience who don't understand, like, what does a Bitcoin miner do? Like, I look at, I try to tell people it's like, it's literally guessing a number. It's like putting
Yeah.
lotto tickets in, and that's like hash power, is you're putting all of your units of guessing into, the network, into a pool, or if you're doing solo mining. Can you make it simple for people who might be, new to what that means.
This was the hardest part to write in the book, to be honest with you, because the machine has three physical connections, right? The machine has to be connected to the internet, it has to be connected to electricity, and it has to be physically connected to some cooling mechanism. So it has to
Mm.
be air cooled or immersion cooled. That's it. You just need three things to run the machine.
Okay.
If you're trying to explain the cooling side of things, we already have this beautiful language around it, which is the world of mechanical engineering and thermodynamics. And this is very well understood. And there's a whole set of principles and a whole set of design schemas that people can kind of tap into. And there is a lot that is already understood in the difference between air cooling and immersion cooling and hydro. So it's not settled. There's a lot of innovation to be have, but it's well studied. And then you look into the electricity side. Electricity is incredibly well understood. Not perfectly by any means, of course, but where electricity comes from, where energy comes from that then creates sources of electricity going through some kind of conversion mechanism, a turbine, an engine, something like this, a large generator. Electricity is something that we're familiar with. We already have kind of an intuitive sense of it, an incomplete sense to the normal consumer, right? I flip a switch on my wall, the light turns on. Where does the electricity come from? I don't know, the wire. Where does the wire go? I don't know. So you can do some educating there, but there's nothing there that is super unintuitive to people because we kind of touch it and feel it every day. The second that you get to that internet connection, so the machine is doing hashing. What the heck is hashing? And
Yeah, that's
exactly
what
as
I
you
was
said, right?
doing that.
Hashing is, well, I'm guessing a random number. Well, why do I have to guess a random number? Well, I
And
have
where
to
does the
guess a
random
random
number come
number.
from? That's the question I get asked a lot. Like, how do you know it's the right guess, and where do these numbers come from, and who decides this random number?
That's right. And
Nope.
that's where it becomes very hard to explain because it's very unintuitive because
Yeah,
where are we guessing in a random number, right? Where does the random number come from?
yeah.
Well, it's in the SHA-256 mathematical field. It is in somewhere in that immense exponential domain that we are guessing for this number. Okay, well, who decides what the number is? Well, it's not really a single number. It's actually a whole bunch of different numbers that could potentially be input into this hashing algorithm that would satisfy the difficulty of the network. Well, what the heck is a hashing algorithm? Well, it's this thing that you put the data into, and it's sort of like a big wood chipper, but it's a wood chipper that no matter what you put into it, it always spits out a perfect 8 by 8 by 8 block. So it
Okay.
makes it very easy to kind of have your Italian villa. You put it in the wood chipper, you have an 8 by 8 by 8 block. Your dog, your pet dog, you put it in the wood chipper, you get an 8 by 8 by 8 block. And it's very easy to check it using this algorithmic wood chipper. The problem is that you can't go backwards, right? So it's very hard to get your Italian villa back. Um, so what the heck is the miner doing? They're guessing this random number. They're putting into some data, throwing it into this SHA-256 wood chipper, and then the thing that it spits out is this very kind of obscure looking hexadecimal number. What am I supposed to do with that? Well, you notice something about it. Well, okay, you count the zeros on it. If you look on mempool, there's a whole bunch of zeros that lead in front of the hash of the blocks. And you go, well, what's that? Well, that's the result that we got when we threw all this information plus this random number into a wood chipper. And most of the time, when I throw all this information and a random number into my SHA-256 wood chipper, it spits out something unpredictable that maybe starts with a 1, it starts with a 2, it starts with an 8, it starts with whatever. Um, so the odds of there starting with something that has a 000 in front of it is very low. And my goal as a miner is to get a hash, get something that's spit out of that wood chipper that starts with a bunch of zeros. And so to do that, I just have to guess. I have to guess a
You gotta
number.
throw a
I
whole
have to
bunch of stuff in your wood
put
chipper.
it in the machine. I got
Keep
to
putting a
guess a
whole bunch of
number. I got to throw it in the
electricity
machine.
and guesses. Okay. Okay.
I just do that. And this is not intuitive. It's not intuitive because to understand it, you have to not only understand the data that's going into the wood chipper, so the block header, the template, the nonce, everything. You have to understand what the wood chipper is doing. And then you have to understand that the result, which is all these zeros, that's the thing that's really hard to find, is that result with all these zeros, and there's no algorithm, there's no way that I can cheat. I just have to guess numbers. And if I find this very rare thing, this very rare hash, that means that I have now settled essentially the tip of the blockchain, the next block. It's what I mean when I say I've found a block. I submit it to the nodes go, yep, this is legit. And then we start building on top of that, and I've settled the transactions that were in the mempool, and I've gotten a reward for it. I've gotten the Coinbase reward. Um, and that's all to say that we haven't even gone into what the difficulty adjustment is.
Mhm.
Because the only reason you have all these weird zeros in front of the resulting hash, the data that comes out of the wood chipper, is because the difficulty adjustment is like this combination accelerator and brake pedal, or it's almost like your HVAC system, but instead of being the AC or the heat, it's both. And the whole thing it's designed to do is just to keep you at a certain temperature, or in our case, is to keep you at a certain block speed.
Time.
That governor wants to keep us at 10 minutes on average. So now we're talking about this crazy conceptual stuff. Now we're getting really high level, and that's where it becomes really difficult. Hands down, the hardest part of the book to write was explaining what hashing was and explaining what proof of work was, as a result of that, and how that fit into the protocol side of things. Um, so it's a long explanation for a not good answer, right? What is this random number? But I don't think that there is a really an elegant singular way to kind of tie it up and give it to people. I think at the end of the day, to really be able to appreciate what's happening, because this is what Satoshi did that was so beautiful,
Yeah.
was that you use this proof of work mechanism so that you can control the issuance and settlement and add a heartbeat to the blockchain. That's what's so beautiful about what this thing is, and for that reason, um, I don't think you want to oversimplify it in some sense. I think it's worth going in and trying to explore and do the work to really get a sense of what the heck it actually is.
Well,
Um,
and I think too, Rob, like, for me, again, I'm not a minor yet, and my goal is to have a home heater and do all this stuff so I can start playing around here. But, I think about the difficulty adjustment and proof of work, because a lot of people ask questions and they're just like, well, why can't I just go like buy 10 million miners and then just have more guesses, like more lottery tickets, as it were? And it's because of that difficulty adjustment. And that's sort of where I think people, when we start to talk about that to them, and it's kind of like, well, if we have this much hash power, then it's going to be this much more difficult to get that little 10-minute block. But if we only, let's say China shuts down and we cut our hash power in half, then it's going to be easier to guess, because we want to stay on that time chain, that every 10 minutes. And so
that's right.
so I try to help people understand it. Of course, I'm still, a newbie to all of this, and I'm on a mission to learn always, and try to share what I get to learn with everybody. But that makes it really important. And, a lot of times people that I'm speaking to, and, I've been to tons of, environmental conferences, and I've got a lot of wonderful healers and coaches and artists and activists and entrepreneurs who are just like, Bitcoin uses too much energy. It's bad. It's
Mm.
boiling the ocean. Why can't you just make it so it doesn't use all this energy? Can you tell people why the energy consumption is so critical, and that we can't just have some kind of little monopoly money printer thing going on?
Yeah,
In the electricity is good. Energy is not a scary thing.
exactly. And it's a hard pill to swallow that energy use is a feature, it's not a bug.
Yeah.
Um, but to really appreciate that, you have to appreciate that there is no energy poor rich country on earth.
Yeah.
It does not exist.
Yeah.
There is no country that has become a first world nation by not consuming more energy,
Mhm.
hands down. Um, that's something that I think people intuitively get, and their response to that is typically, well, we have to be stewards of our consumption, right? We have to be responsible stewards of the world. We have to recycle, and we have to rinse off everything and compost in the backyard and drive our Teslas and save the universe. Um, And aspirationally, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with wanting to minimize your personal footprint in the world or be more efficient in the way that you use resources. But the electricity is not the problem.
Mhm.
Because if you want humanity to continue to succeed and to create incredible things, if you want people to be putting rockets on Mars and curing cancers using AI clusters, the only way to do that is to consume more and more and more energy.
Yeah.
Um, so the first thing I think you have to you have to energy pill people. You have to get them to
Yeah.
understand that energy use is a feature and not a bug. And what Bitcoin is doing, yes, it's energy intensive, but what kind of energy is it competitive for? Because it's
Yeah.
not competitive for the energy that you want to run your AC in the middle of the day.
Mhm.
You're always going to pay more for your electricity that you receive than a Bitcoin miner is going to be willing to pay for their electricity, because we are on a very, very competitive network. If you look
Mhm.
at the hash price, which is the metric that you can search that will give you the the expected USD value per amount of hash power that you have, right?
Mhm.
Per terahash, per petahash, which is 1,000 terahash. For a petahash, it's like 40 something dollars that you can make per petahash, based on the reward you're going to get from the network. That's not competitive when it comes to the electricity price that I need. So I make 40 some odd dollars for my 1,000 terahash, my one petahash. I can't pay 11 cents a kilowatt hour or 12 cents a kilowatt hour and make that math work. And if I just want to do it ideologically, it doesn't make sense, because I'm
Mhm.
going to be paying thousands of dollars a month in electricity bills and making 600, 800 bucks in Bitcoin. So maybe it makes sense to some people who ideologically just want a dollar cost average into no KYC Satoshis,
Mhm.
but it doesn't make sense as a business. There's no viable business there. So the question is, what energy? Not the energy, but what energy?
So let's talk about number 1 on our list of 5 things. And so I think, segueing into like electrification of, you know, remote villages, let's say, we've got Alana who did Dirty Coin. And I remember she was
Yeah.
interviewing one of the doctors out there, and he was like, we used to do surgery by candlelight and the wind would blow and then I couldn't do my surgery. And so
That's right.
now you guys came and, electrified the village with hydro, and now we've got electricity, plus we're mining for Bitcoin. And so the capital expenditure for these people to get electricity that are super remote is never going to happen, because it's not profitable to just say, cool, we're going to go build something and connect you to this really, really long grid not going to happen. So can you talk a little bit about like why, like that's like we think about stranded energy or we think about
Sure.
remote energy, and how that is actually something that we can turn into usable energy for the folks there, as well as, and then we'll go into methane after that one. But let's talk about
Perfect.
the electrification of the villages.
This is a perfect example. So there's a really fantastic entrepreneur in the space who I had the pleasure of actually interviewing for the book, whose name is Eric Hersman.
Gridless. Yeah.
And yeah, his company is Gridless Compute.
Hmm.
Fantastic entrepreneur, one of the nicest guys you'll meet in your entire life if you have the pleasure of connecting with him at a conference or event. He details it so beautifully, and you have to understand that in this case, when you look at the problem that's happening in remote villages that he's addressing with Gridless, he is going to these communities that have some kind of untapped resource. Run of the river. They're going to build a dam. They want to add some kind of electrical generation utility, typically, right? The first question is, who's going to fund it,
Yeah.
and where's the money going to come from? And so when you start to shop around, the people that you tend to go to tend to be like an NGO, like a feel good organization.
Hmm.
Of course, they want results, but you have to sell the story to them. You have to say, this village is on this very critical river, and these people culturally who live here have been here for hundreds, if not thousands, of years, and they need electricity because they produce crafts or they arts or something like this. You're shopping it to NGOs, you're shopping it to nonprofits, you're shopping it to large foundations, and you're essentially getting them to make a distribution of capital where the payback is entirely hypothetical. entirely hypothetical, because the assumption in the development world is that if we build it, they will come. If I throw a megawatt of hydro generation in this remote African village, when I do my modeling as the builder or as the person running this facility, I'm going to say the first month or the first, the go live, 20% of the community is going to be buying this electricity. And in year 3, it's going to be 35%. And in year 7, it's going to jump up to 55%. And then the town is going to be bustling and people are going to be flowing in. And I have to tell myself this story, which is that if I build it, they will come. This city will flourish because they have electricity. And generally speaking, as Eric details in his interview in the book, is that this doesn't happen. Everyone is just kind of throwing numbers at the wall, being very, very idealistic about it, but it doesn't happen. And so what happens now when you throw Bitcoin mining into the equation? I have a location that has a resource, so some untapped river where I can add generation, and I'm going to throw a megawatt of hydro generation on this river. Now, when I go to do my modeling, when I add Bitcoin mining, on day 1, I can use 100% of that electricity. 100%.
Yeah, that's so fascinating.
It's like if I built an apartment complex. If I built this, a 500 unit apartment complex, and as soon as we cut the ribbon, every single apartment is rented out and generating cash. And then it gets better. Because say somebody in the neighborhood wants to come and move into my apartment complex. Okay, I'm just going to pull out somebody who's in an apartment complex in one of those rooms, and I'm going to put you in because I like you. You're a real person. It's the exact same principle when you talk about this business model in remote villages, which is I have a megawatt. Maybe I put a half a megawatt of Bitcoin miners in a container that's right next door to this mine. On day 1, my apartment complex is 50% full. And so now all of a sudden, people from the village can come and fill those extra apartment slots. And if I ever hit a situation where more people are in the village than I have room for, it's very easy for me to say, hey, shut off one of your Bitcoin miners. We need more for the village. There's a clear priority there in terms of what you are building for and who you're selling energy to. And the added benefit is that instead of going to an NGO and saying, our estimated payback is going to be 25 years, and we're going to estimate it based on these capacity numbers and who comes. Instead of doing that, I immediately say, hey, your payback is in 3.5 to 5 years. And as soon as we keep running these assets on your generator, you're actually going to be able to charge less to your consumers, your final consumers, because if you think about the total capacity, that total megawatt that you have, I've just given you 50% or 70% or 80% of your customers that want to consume all the energy that you can generate. So you, on your staffing side, on your revenue side, you can now project out on your generation business substantially further because you know that I want to keep buying your energy. And you know that as soon as somebody moves to the town or moves to the village and wants some electricity, that cool, you'll shut a miner down because the priority are the people in this town that we're going to be developing for. So they get cheaper electricity in the short term and they get capacity in the long term. And it rapidly accelerates the payback for these projects. And it does it without involving foundation dollars or needing to go to some large NGO or the United Nations or some large nonprofit or anything like this. It's purely a business decision. And for that reason, it's incentivized, at least in my opinion, in a more sort of clean and pure way.
Yeah, and that's so exciting. I mean, I just think about investors and people who are interested in doing good and earning a living while they're doing it. It's just such a cool model. Let's talk number 2. Let's talk about methane, and because this is a big one. I look out my window at night and I see all the flared gas in the fields.
You do see them.
Yeah. Oh, heck yeah. And I'm just like, where is that? Let's go get some miners over there. Can you talk to people about what's flared methane and why Bitcoin miners can help with the environment that way?
Sure. Yeah. So the conversation you hear around around Bitcoin mining and methane mitigation, and there's some really fantastic work that's been coming out from Dan Batten, who has done a ton
Mhm.
of research on this front,
Totally, yeah, he's the man.
particularly targeting this problem. And this is a really interesting, maybe a story of kind of odd bedfellows in the Bitcoiner space, where you
Mhm,
wind up with folks who are very, very environmentally minded, who
mhm,
might not typically grok Bitcoin or think so much of Bitcoin, are becoming extremely strong advocates of Bitcoin, because what they're noticing is that there is a huge environmental problem. So if you look at methane, why does methane get picked on? I thought it was carbon. It wasn't methane. Everyone wants to talk about the gases in the air. I'm breathing the air. What's
mhm,
going on? Um, Methane is a really interesting one, because outside of the largest kind of natural producers of methane, which is like swampland or agriculture is another big
mhm,
one. There's a ton of man-made methane, and methane is the result of oil and gas drilling, typically, which is fracking or just kind of standard downhole oil and gas drilling. The way that the distribution of energy under the surface of our Earth looks is that you oftentimes get integrated gas. So you get oil, which is really where you make all of your money, right? Most of the money, if you're drilling, if you're fracking, is going to come from oil. You want the oil. Um, but that is often mixed in with methane. It's kind of the fizz at the top of the Coke. And so when you
mhm,
poke your straw down into a basin to try to acquire that oil, you're letting off, in the same way that you pop a Coke open, you're letting off this gas, and it's man-made. And in terms of the environmental argument, there are estimates saying that it's as much as 40 times more damaging in the environment, or warming in the earth, if
mhm.
that's the metric that you're using, compared to CO2, right?
I've heard upwards of 80 times more. I don't know if that's
I would
accurate.
believe that. There's
I don't know.
there's kind of
But
this
yeah,
trade-off of, like,
who
it's
knows?
atmospherically there substantially
Mhm,
less time, like it breaks down a lot
right.
quicker, but it's a lot more rapid in terms of the heating. And we're also buttloads of it are being released, right? Um, so it's a growing problem. It coincides with the fact that any oil producing nation is inevitably going to have this gas, which is not worth as much as the oil. That being said, it's not that it's not valuable, because natural gas is obviously important. You can liquefy it, you can throw it into a pipeline, you can sell it. But there are oftentimes, very, very oftentimes, where the price of natural gas drops. It's not worth it anymore to collect that, or to sell it to market. You may have, because of the price of it, it may not be worth it to go out there and pick it up from the middle of nowhere, Colorado,
Mhm, mhm.
or it simply might be coming off of your well, and you want the oil so much more that this gas is just a waste product. So what do people do? They they vent it, which is releasing it directly into the atmosphere that satellites can pick up, and there's some monitoring there. You can flare it. So basically, those torches that you see from your house, spark it, and then you just let it burn. And I'm sure everybody has seen this driving through rural areas, where you see a flare somewhere in the in the rural in a rural area by a basin, or you can consume it. And so what people are doing now is they're realizing that it's very common on these oil and gas sites to have gensets. A genset is just a combination of an engine, either like a turbine or a reciprocating engine, like a Chevy, like a small block Chevy, um, attached to an electrical generation source. And so you can take your waste product, what might otherwise be going to the atmosphere, and you can now monetize it. And Upstream Data is a company that has been very, very strong in advocating for this work. Crusoe Energy is one in Colorado that is has been doing the same thing in the HPC and Bitcoin space. But the general idea is that you're taking a waste product, and one that is really, really frowned upon by
Mhm.
regulatory agencies and environmental agencies, and you are turning it into hash power. And by doing that, you get this kind of win-win-win situation, where if the numbers work in the business, all you have to do is, well, all you have to do, the operations are very difficult, of course. You have to run a genset, you have to keep electricity flowing, you have to be consuming this gas, and then you're running machines in one of these containerized solutions out on one of these sites, and you're successfully reducing the impact of what would be a vent or a flare by an order of magnitude. You're substantially reducing the environmental impact. Of course, there's going to be exhaust coming out of the engine, but the difference between venting or flaring versus combustion, which in a well-tuned engine is far more complete than just lighting a candle, is head and shoulders different. And especially because you're monetizing it, you are not relying on an external agency to dump hundreds of millions of dollars into playing cleanup in all these oil wells.
Yeah, I think that that's the point I wanted to bring up was, I mean, with regulations coming, in and out, depending on what administrations we have. I mean, if these administrations, and I know Biden was trying to, get more legislation to regulate the methane mitigate, exposure in the world, and so that costs a lot of money. And so instead of it costing millions and millions of dollars, like you just said, it's like, hey, we're the Bitcoin miners. We're going to come out and actually make you some money, and you're going to be in compliance. And so to me, that seems like a total win-win, and so you're solving for several problems, and I think that's it's just so cool. I mean, I just feel like the creativity and the intelligence and the genius of this community, it just keeps rocking my little brain. Um, okay, let's go into number 3. Let's talk about grid stability, and let's talk about, like, 'cause you mentioned ERCOT earlier, and I also want to talk about Kent at SAS Mining and what they're doing
Cool.
down south. So let's talk about, like, renewables. Let's talk about grid stability and how Bitcoin, like you were saying, you can just turn off the miners and, okay, everybody, you get the energy today instead of the miners. So can you talk about that for number
Well,
3?
you threw renewables in there, so that's a big.
Yeah.
You threw the monkey wrench. So
Woohoo!
the question is, what is a grid, right? You have power, I have power, but what is a grid? And it's conceptually one of the most complicated machines that we've created as a human species, right? The wires that come to my house or go to my panel in the back go to my street power and then go back somewhere to a substation that then go to some kind of high transmission lines, those big lines that you often see on the sides of the highways, and then go into some other substation and somehow connect to a natural gas plant or a solar plant, solar farm rather, or a wind farm, um, somewhere. I don't know where it is. I don't know where the plant is right now that's producing the electricity that's coming to my house, but I get the benefit of it. And so conceptually, the grid is this thing where you have generation, transmission, and distribution, and then you have grid operators who are balancing this thing and trying to make sure that you always have electricity at all points in time, because we live in the modern world. What would happen if we couldn't get home and turn on Netflix? And this is a known problem, and this is a problem that we've had since we started electrifying the U.S. originally. Was how to do it and how to do it best, and it's an engineering problem and it's a coordination problem. Because if you look at something like a city, it doesn't always use just the same amount of electricity all the time.
Yeah.
There's a change. There's a demand curve, what we refer to as the duck curve, right? Um, and so you get kind of a peak in the mornings where people are waking up, they're getting their day started, they're kind of getting to where they need to be to go work, and then the energy kind of drops, and then ramps up again into the afternoons as people are getting home. They're commuting, they're running some errands, they're picking up their kids from work. The kids are on the iPads, or they're playing a video game with their friends. You have a lot more energy consumption, and then it kind of falls off over the course of the night as people start to go to sleep and drops down. And so what the grid operator has to do is they have to be incredible estimators and predictors, because they're trying to match. They're playing a matching game. They want to match the consumption to the production. And so the production is a mix of coal plants, gas plants, hydro plants, solar, wind, whatever it might be, whatever's producing electricity in your local neighborhood. They have to coordinate with these people who are producing energy in different ways, and they have kind of different profiles, almost like if you're on a racetrack and you have a pickup truck going against a Toyota Corolla, going against a Mazda race car or something like this. All these these generators that have very different performance characteristics, and they can only move in certain ways. They can only ramp up in certain ways or ramp down in certain ways. Some of them you can't ramp them at all. So when the sun comes up, your solar plant's making electricity. I can't really call it and tell it to produce more on a cloudy day.
Right.
It's not dispatchable. So what's happening is your grid operator is constantly trying to balance the supply and the demand, because the nature of the grid is that it always has to be balanced in its hertz and in the voltage that it produces. And when it's not, when supply doesn't match demand, is when you start to get blackouts, you start to get brownouts, you lose modernity, right? You can't run the stuff of
Mhm.
life. So what the heck does Bitcoin mining have to do with this? It's a big complicated machine. It's got generators, it's got consumers. The Bitcoin miner is a special kind of consumer. And the reason they're a special kind of consumer is because they have a couple of characteristics about them that make them different. One is that they always want to be running. Always. I always want to be running. If it's profitable for me to run.
Yeah.
So I live in a space where I want you to give me as much electricity as humanly possible, but I'm only going to run when it's profitable for me to run. Which means that I really want to use as much of your electricity as possible, Mr. Grid Operator, but I don't want to compete with the grandma out in Tulsa who in the middle of, August is going to be cranking her AC. She can have those megawatts, right? She can consume that electricity because it's just not profitable for me. So for a grid operator, you get this really powerful tool, which is normally if I need more electricity, I call up a plant or I call up a load following resource. I call up a combined cycle gas plant or I call up a peaker plant and I say, hey, price of electricity is coming up. I'm going to need you to ramp up as hard as you can in this next 15, 30-minute window. I need 50 megawatts. You're going to do it because the price of electricity is going up, because demand is going up. Um, Go, do your thing. And they're going to ramp up. It's going to be very inefficient because peaker plants are not super efficient to run, but you have to have them because you need the electricity. So instead of doing that, I now go to somebody and I say, hey, what if you just turned off?
Mm.
Instead of me having to call this peaker plant and they have to fire it up and then I have to wait 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes for them to get to full capacity. And at that point, I'm kind of balancing things out. What if I just go to these Bitcoin miner guys? Because I know they want to run all the time. And what if I say to them, hey, could you turn off for me? And they'll say, well, could you give me like maybe a little better rate or something? Could you give me a hedge? Could you give me some kind of cost saving on my delivery fees and my contracting that I have? And as the grid operator, you go, yeah, this is amazing. This is a great deal. I'll give you a little bit of benefit on your delivery fees, help you kind of push your overall cost down. And what you'll give to me is assurance that if I need 50 megawatts or 200 megawatts or 300 megawatts, you will turn it off. You will have it there, you will shut it off, and you will give it back to me so that I can keep balancing my grid. So, in terms of grid stability, this is one that's obviously most talked about in Texas.
Mhm.
Because ERCOT, which is the management entity that keeps the lights on in Texas, they have a free market. It's a free floating market, right? And so anybody can come in and build or can trade on the market or can consume on the market, and you can negotiate one off with people. So there's a benefit there to being very, very large and negotiating with the grid operator to provide these ancillary services to curtail when the price doesn't look profitable for you, and to cut deals with the operator because you're providing an insurance policy for them that
Yeah.
when it comes time to turn off, because we have to protect everybody who's cranking their AC on a 115-degree day, you'll do it. And this is probably the largest scale that we'll see in Bitcoin mining, where people are on these free markets, these open markets, and they are working directly with these operators as a resource to the operator, which is very, very powerful. And I think we're very much at the early days of this, even though there's very big operators in Texas. We're still quite early in terms of having mastered this strategy. It'll be kind of exciting to see where this goes in the next even 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. I know I think about, again, the people who think like, "Oh, no, it's using all this energy." It's almost like, "No, we're the sponge." Like, the miners are the sponge
Yeah,
that are cleaning up the excess energy,
good
and then it's
example.
like, "Oh, good, there's a spill, but now this is actually gonna go to," like you said, "to grandma because she needs to turn on her AC, so you don't need to clean it up. You redirect it over there, but it's profitable still, because you have that incentive of them giving you discounts or whatever it might be." Um, so I think that's super important. Let's talk about, this will be 6 now, but but we'll go quick because we've only got a little bit of time. Um,
Sure.
let's talk about, I wanna talk about job creation. And, I think about, I think I forget who was talking in El Salvador, but they were talking about how where they were setting up some miners, and it was very heavy gang, like militia, and a lot of
Mhm.
violence around the areas. And then instead of these people being the enemies, it's like they started to teach them, hey, you guys don't have to be in these gangs. You don't have to be in these violent situations. And you can start feeding your family and your children because you're going to work and learn how to do Bitcoin mining. Um, to me, that seems like such a great way for, obviously I'm all about Bitcoin for peace and how does Bitcoin contribute to a more peaceful world. And I think, like,
Mhm.
if we're redirecting people from, places of oppression and violence into places of opportunity and hope and prosperity, um, have you encountered any of that in your Bitcoin mining world?
Yeah, I think it's maybe an overarching trend, right? Which is you'll see in under-resourced places that the options that you might have might be to leave the place that you are,
Yeah.
go somewhere new. So in the U.S., you might see this as like the small town that has no opportunities, and unless you manage the local Walmart or own the local car dealership, there just may not be resources for you, or it would be silly if you were young and aspirational to stay in the hometown. There's
Yeah.
hundreds, if not thousands, of these little towns all over the U.S. where people will say under their breath, like, "Yeah, I love it here, but why the heck would you stay here? Go
Yeah.
somewhere else. Go to Chicago, go to New York, go to Denver, go to Miami, go to Los Angeles, go to San Francisco, go be where the opportunity is."
Yeah.
And even more so as you start to look internationally, right? It's the fact of, okay, I'm in a small town or a place that's under resourced. I don't even have the resources to leave. Um,
Yeah.
I might be still staying with my family, and I can't get a job. Maybe I could like drive a taxi or something, but there's not like there's skilled labor coming out to where I am. Um, what's been really interesting to see is that the growth of a any substantial Bitcoin mining necessitates all these other ancillary industries.
Hmm.
It necessitates it, and it, in some sense, requires it locally.
Yeah,
So
like
when you start
repairs.
to
You need
look,
to know you can't AI the repairs from somewhere. You need Bitcoin. Like, if you're gonna have
you
miner, you need to have repairs. That's a huge one. Like, just training
precisely,
people how to become ASICs repair, guys and stuff, or girls. I don't know if there's a lot of
yeah,
girls.
and you can monitor it. You get your Starlink or you get your Ethernet, and you can monitor it from anywhere. But you
Yeah.
still need somebody to go crack open the doors
Mhm.
and change the filters, wash everything, pull the machines for service, understand how the machines work, understand how the networking works. The IT side is a huge side in these mines. You have to understand how to monitor these things. You have to understand if something breaks on the electricity side. Is a fuse going to pop? Is a breaker going to trip? I need a qualified electrician to come and take a look at that because we're dealing with huge amounts of power, and that gets dangerous very very quickly. So I need somebody competent. So now that's not even getting into if you use immersion, in which case you probably want somebody who knows how to work with these pump systems, or somebody who can work with these dielectric fluids, or who can work with these dry coolers that are required. There's a whole other subset of specialties that can be managed locally through local talent, because it's oftentimes substantially cheaper to train somebody locally to do this than it would be um, to bring in your field service technician who's going to be there in 6 weeks to come fix your dry cooler. If you're not hashing, you're not making money. So you need to manage these things locally. So it's
Yeah.
what's interesting is that and we're only figuring it out now because these big sites are starting to kind of grow.
Yeah.
We're only figuring out now that oh wait, it actually necessitates a lot of these skilled trades the second that you start to get over a certain level of scale.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important thing that we think about, like, because right now we definitely understand that, the world is changing. What are our kids gonna do? What are they gonna have jobs, opportunities for? And we think about all the machines taking over, but it's like, well, someone's still gotta manage the machines of any industry, right? Whether it's, these AI data centers, whether it's Bitcoin data, mining data centers. It's important that I think we get excited about our hands, you know, and a lot of people aren't training that way anymore. And I'm like, these jobs aren't going away.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? Maybe in 100 years from now, we'll have the flying robots that do everything for us, and we may not even be here as a species. Um, but I think that's an important thing to think about. We're going to do a bonus one, but let's talk about clean energy, and let's talk about hydro. Let's talk about solar. Let's talk about why, like, how Bitcoin is contributing to, the funding of these types of projects when we don't have buyers just yet for all the electricity, like you said. Can you talk about that, and then let's just throw in a little micronuclear while we're at
Ah,
it.
well, it's the core problem, right? Is that if you build it, they will come.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I see lots of positive things happening in the energy space, and I'm incredibly optimistic about it. I think that it becomes very intuitive for people to understand that Bitcoiners or Bitcoin miners, in a very strange way, occupy this place of being the buyer of first resort and the buyer of last resort.
Yeah.
And it's very rare to figure out who's going to use it. And if we're going to have innovation in energy, in electricity production, which I think is incredibly important, because the nature of innovation is, right, is it's you kind of move, or you kind of move incrementally, and then every once in a while you hit these big, like, stepwise shifts, right? So a good
Hmm.
example is like HPC AI. And it kind of reminds me of what was happening in, like, the early 2000s, where people would say, like, people people overestimate the amount of change or impact something can have in a year, but
Uh-huh.
they drastically underestimate what can happen in 5 years or 10 years. And I get the sense that maybe AI or HPC is kind of in that space right now,
What's
where
HPC?
high performance compute.
Okay.
So tangentially, essentially the same thing. People are so optimistic, so bullish on it, that it just feels like this massive bubble right now. But we haven't started to scratch the surface for what this looks like
Yeah.
in 5 years or 10 years from now. But we know that it's going to require a ton of energy, a ton of energy.
Yeah.
So we have this buyer there, and when you combine this high value buyer, which is this AI buyer, who's not really competitive with the Bitcoin buyer, because the Bitcoin miner wants your cheap energy, and we're not willing to pay these expensive rates that these HPC people can pay. You have two people who have very different profiles, very different buying strategies, very different build out strategies. They capitalize in a very different way. They have very different perspectives on payback period. The AI guys can look at like 20, 30-year timelines. The Bitcoin guys, we want payback in a year and a half, 2 years, and otherwise
Mhm.
that's slow. Um, the combination of these two buyers, to me, is this perfect confluence where you can start to incentivize really powerful innovations in energy production. So whether that's small nuclear reactors, well, who's going to pay for that energy? I don't know, an HPC guy, a Bitcoin buy guy. I don't know. We just know that there's this growing demand there. These huge solar farms, which have the benefit of being able to produce a ton of electricity very passively, very low cost, but they have the downside where they only produce when the sun's out.
Yeah.
So your capacity factor, the total amount of time over the course of a given year that you're actually producing electricity, is typically sub 30%. And that's something that you can't do anything about,
Yeah.
because seasonally, the Earth is going to continue to tilt on its axis, and your summer days are always going to be longer than your winter days. And every once in a while, you're still going to get the clouds. Um, you can provide demand to all those people.
Yeah.
So it's very hard to estimate, right? You can only kind of look at what's happening and then kind of smile if it actually unfolds. But I think in terms of like estimating or grand predictions, it's so impossible to even like schematize for me at this point that I've tried to stay far away from making grand predictions about energy or electricity, and really stick to the idea that um, we have the buyers, we have the interested buyers, the Bitcoin buyer, the HPC, the AI buyer, where they will be in 5 to 10 years. Maybe the same level of demand, maybe very different levels of demand. But at the end of the day, that is enough to me to be very bullish on diverse ways of producing energy overall.
Yeah, that's so exciting too. And I think about they're always going to be there to pick it up as long as it's it's profitable, especially the Bitcoin miners. Okay, let's talk about, we'll do the bonus one, which is heating our homes with the excess
Yeah.
heat from, we live in Colorado. Obviously, it's cold as heck here 6 months out of the year. You got to have, either your propane, your liquid, your natural gas, or your electric heater on. And so let's talk about that, for the next couple minutes, and then we'll talk about your book, and I'll let you go free.
I love it. Yeah, home heating is sort of like in the space. I think home heating is like the pretty girl at the party right now, where everyone is trying to find out a way to talk to her, but nobody quite understands what to say yet, because
Oh,
there's something there that makes sense. So
yeah,
to go very high level, right? The Bitcoin miner produces heat, tons of heat.
yeah,
You need heat in your house.
yeah.
And you generally have a couple of key sources of heat. And one of them is probably sitting in your basement or your utility room right now.
Hmm.
And it's 50 or 100 gallons of hot water, so that when you turn on the tap, you get hot water. And that can be electrically powered or gas powered, natural gas powered, to heat that water. But that's a sunk cost. That's a utility bill for you.
Yeah.
And then you have your home heating. So in the winter, seasonally, obviously, you turn the heat on in your house, and your furnace turns on, and you stay nice and cozy by the fireplace, and you feel good. You feel comfortable. And what people are trying to the nut they're trying to crack right now is, how do I take a machine that runs on electricity, makes me money, and how do I plug that into these two things that I know I need anyway, which is, I want to be nice and toasty in my house, and I know that I want to have warm water. And that's a really, really hard problem to solve for. It would not be the scary pretty girl at the party problem if it wasn't a very hard problem to solve for. And the reason it's really hard to solve for is because Bitcoin miners are not like laptops. We haven't had 20 years of producing them. We don't have kind of best practices or open source versions of them. They're not like TVs, where they're so ubiquitous that you can pick them up anywhere or swap them out and do so very cheaply. That doesn't mean they're not going that direction, but they're just not there yet.
Hmm.
So they're still relatively specialized devices. And if they break, you don't get heat.
Yeah.
So it's a hard sell to somebody who maybe doesn't understand Bitcoin, but wants to save money on their utility bill. Because you say, well, you're going to be able to replace your heater with this device, and it'll pay you money, but it's going to be more expensive than your normal home heater. And if it breaks, you won't get heat. Sorry.
Yeah.
So it is a hard nut to crack. Do I think that it's not going to be getting cracked? No, I think people are going to figure it out, but it's very early. This space is going to take 5 to 10 years to develop, and it's going to develop as a result of development in the ASIC space, development in the chip space. It's going to take years. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't overestimate the speed at which this kind of thing can happen. And the fact that you can buy a space heater from Walmart for $15, it's hard to charge somebody $200 for something that they run 1 month out of the year.
Yeah. Yeah, depending on where we're at, obviously. And obviously, we've got no KYC Bitcoin that we can get if we're doing this home heating, but
Yep,
it's not, you're not stacking for your retirement necessarily with
that's
this.
right.
But you are, uh, contributing to the network, you're getting some heat. It's just nice to be a part of it, but you're
That's right.
right. It's not something that you're gonna rely on, and especially since you're not running it 12 months a year either, unless you are, because we're not gonna I don't need heat right now. It's September,
That's
August. So
right.
do I wanna do this and just blast the heat out and pay that high electricity cost? No, probably not. I'd rather just go buy some Bitcoin. But it's just we're right on that razor's edge of the future, and I think it's just so cool that the pretty girl at the party analogy. It's like she's going to get talked to at some point, and they're going to figure this out
One day
one
they'll
day.
talk to
One
her.
day, someone's going to ask her to dance. Let's talk about your book, dude. Like,
Sure.
let's get people to buy this beautiful book of yours. I'm going to pull up the Amazon
Thank
thing. Yeah,
you.
give people a heads up on on this book, and then we'll rock and roll here. Where
Sure,
is
sure, sure. Yeah,
yeah.
so the book is called The Bitcoin Miner's Almanac, and it is written to be as non-technical as humanly possible. But of course, the one thing that I think that has to be a bit technical was the breakdown of hashing and the difficulty adjustment and all that. So
Mhm.
if you can hang on for dear life at that part,
Mhm.
I can promise you that you will get the kind of high level schemas of understanding the shape of this space, right? So it's a book in two parts. The first part is an introduction to the machine. What are the parts of the machine? What the heck does it do? Those three physical connections that I mentioned, and then an introduction into where those physical connections go, and kind of an assay of what does the space look like? Where does electricity come from? How do people get it? Much of what we discussed on this podcast just now. What is hashing? How do people cool these machines? Kind of an overview. Give people a sense of what the tools look like. Let me understand the tools, and then help me from there. I can start to kind of play with them and understand how somebody might put together a business and why this might be a profitable business, even though it's very different from another business in the space. So that's the second half of the book. The second half of the book is interview driven, where we talked to Kent from Saz Mining, we talked to Jason Less from Riot, we talked to Eric Hirschman from Gridless, we talked to a kind of alchemist, and a few more folks. Uh, Charlie Spears, who talks a bit about oil and gas mining. And we go through these individuals, and they all have very different reasons and very different setups in the way in which they mine Bitcoin.
Mhm.
But for them, all these different models are profitable for them. They work and they're different. And so, what I want folks to really take away is, okay, you can start with the same fundamental tool, and you can have very different businesses based on the way that you assemble the pieces.
Mhm.
And that's a bit about the structure, a bit about the organization, and it's exciting to kind of start this thing and to put it together, because I can tell you I'm already itching to get the second edition in the works, because
Cool.
of course there's stuff that was immediately introduced, as soon as the book went to print, that needs to be updated or needs to be added to. One of which is that Mara had just announced a two-phase cooling solution,
Ooh.
which is nowhere in the book because it didn't exist when I was writing the drafts and getting it edited. But it's such a cool thing that they've done, that it needs to be in the book as an explanation of a method of cooling. It's a really really cool technology.
Nice.
Um, so as long as people keep creating things, I think there will always be future opportunities, maybe to spit out a new edition every 12 to 18 months or something like this. But thus far, for the casual reader, for somebody who's curious about this, who understands a little bit about Bitcoin but wants to know more about mining, it's really built for you. It's designed to kind of give you the tools and let you understand how these pieces hang together.
Yeah, it's super important, and I love that you wanted to synthesize things and be a dot connector for people. I think we need that so much, and and you have to have that repetitive exposure to these things from different angles. I think in order to keep
Yeah.
grokking it, and because it's complicated, and unless you're an engineer or somebody who really understands this kind of stuff, it's like it's a lot to process, and obviously there's a whole spectrum of all of us who want to understand Bitcoin just in terms of like, okay, I just want to save it and its number go up. Don't bother me. I don't care that it's a network. I can care less, right? That's all they care about, all the way up to like, I want to be a miner. I want to be a home miner. I want to run a company. I
Mhm.
want to go get volcano geothermal energy and all that. So there's a giant spectrum. And so I think it's super important that we have tools like this, to enter into the space, and again, and not feel like, oh my gosh, I'm not over here yet. So I don't even want to bother. And so thank you for bringing this to us, us interested people who are, not normies necessarily, but sort of we're minor normies,
Of
but
course,
all the
yeah.
way up to the people who aren't, normies on it. So this is super powerful. Where can everybody find you, Rob? Right here.
Cool. Yep. Follow me. Bikes and Bitcoin. DMs are open. I'm always happy to chat with folks and talk to me about the cool things that you're building or the things that you're trying to model. I get a few pings a week from folks that are just curious, asking questions, wanting to see if it's right for them. I can't give you obviously investment advice or I'm not making any affiliate links off of this, but I want there to be more people learning and growing and making stuff in the space. So always feel free to reach out to me. You can find the book at Bitcoin Magazine. It's published through Bitcoin Magazine Publishing.
Oh,
You can find
cool.
it on Amazon.
Okay.
Amazon's got both the quick order and then also a Kindle version that's gone up. I'd like to do a book version, an audio book version. I think it'd be fun to go through and kind of do the read. And I've been told that you can do fun things on the audiobook version, like you can pause and kind of go into a tangent or something like this, which I think might be a lot of fun for me. So that may potentially be coming out in the future,
Oh, good.
an audiobook version as well.
Yeah, get audiobook. I'm an audiobook nerd because I drive around a lot up in the mountains and stuff. So
Very
I
cool.
think it's good to listen to stuff too. So any final words for people? And just again, thank you so much for taking your time and obviously putting a lot of energy. I know how hard it is to assemble thoughts and put it together in a book. I haven't accomplished my dream yet of my book. So just I'm happy that you gave birth to it and got it out. um, I know it's a labor of love. Any final words for people listening?
Yeah, the same as always, which is just if you're passionate about this stuff, take the leap. You'll figure out where you fit in. I have a philosophy background and was running random startups in New Orleans for the better part of a decade. You get in where you fit in. And the space is so small and the space is so
Yeah.
desperate to have folks that are contributing and educating that I'm not going to say it's easy
Mm-mm.
because we're having to write the rule books while it's almost like or to switch analogies where you're having to like lay down the race course while you're racing on the race course. So it's
That's
almost like
a
a
good one, dude.
Disney or like an Acme, like the cartoon where they're on the train and they're putting the track in front of the racing train, and if they stop, they're going to fly into nothingness. It's like the old Looney Tunes.
Oh my God.
That's the world we're in right now,
Yeah.
and it's not just going to happen by itself. If you're really passionate about whatever it might be, about custody, about marketplaces, about mining, um, it's not going to happen by itself. It takes you, and even though you might not have the a beautifully vetted custom resume that speaks to it, you can still show up and just be curious, and you can learn, and you'll get in where you fit in.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's such great advice. And I think too, a lot of it, it's like there's no, obviously Bitcoin's permissionless. And so working in with for Bitcoin in any capacity, it's like you don't need to go get approval from the HR department to go start a project or to go do a podcast or to
Yeah,
start a company or to write a book or any of it. And so it's one of those, I find it's just such a great ocean of talent and people who are go-getters and doers. And obviously we're freedom lovers and truth seekers. And so it's just like, oh, wow, cool. It's just so cool. And the sharing mentality of everybody, because obviously Bitcoin's open source. And so we're all wanting to like, all, rising tides lift all boats. And it really is true for this world and this industry. So everyone is invited and welcome into Bitcoin. And obviously I'm living proof, like I'm not a coder and I'm not an electrical engineer or but I'm like, I can contribute my little thumbprint on the sculpture that is Bitcoin. And so it's
that's
pretty
right.
neat. So yeah. So thanks so much again, Rob. And thanks again for just you being you and just again, being an angel on my shoulder and being a great friend and just a fellow mission driven nerd.
That's right. Thank you so much. It's always my pleasure.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, you guys make sure you get on Amazon or go to Bitcoin Magazine and get the Bitcoin Miners Almanac, and you can go follow Rob at Bikes and Bitcoin. I'll have all the links and everything in the show notes. I got to get some editing going here in the next couple weeks, and then we'll get it out. But thanks everybody for tuning in, and thanks again, Rob. I really, really appreciate you. So,
Beautiful. Likewise.
all right, everybody, peace, love, and warmth.